All right. So, everyone, what we'll do briefly is let's just go over, we'll go over kind of we have a balanced approach to analytics, and I want to talk about that real briefly. And we'll talk about how we can engage with your client with accelerators that we have built out, and kind of how those can be built out into larger integrated healthcare offerings. That leads us into the build versus buy decision, and then essentially what we'll do is we'll go down the build path, and that's when we'll see the actual big bet demo and some of the different technologies that we're using right now. Okay? So our overall approach to analytics at really any client is a very balanced approach. So we have the capabilities and the experience on our team to speak to your client from a strategic high-level standpoint as well as the lower-level tactical implementation side. Okay? So what that means for our overall offerings is if you need us to take a strategic top-down approach with your client, we can do that, and we've done that a lot in the past. A lot of times what we'll start with is an overall strategic assessment where your client is at a point where they have too many decisions to make. There's a lot of things in flight, and they just need help figuring out what the long-term roadmap is going to look like. So, these assessments include current state, future state, gap analysis, and roadmap activities. If they don't need something quite that large, we can come in and support an in-flight BI program at varying levels. Right? Now, when we're talking about the tactical end-to-end implementation, bottom-up approach, obviously we have a lot of experience with overall BI implementation, and this includes, it's not only the front-end dashboard side, it's all the way back through the entire pipeline of BI architecture. So whether it's master data management, whether it's enterprise integration, operational data stores, et cetera. The entire thing we can implement. We can also come in and do the smaller architectural health checks, or in some cases, the client they already have the long-term strategy in mind, but maybe they haven't decided on a particular stack. What we can do is come in with our BI demo environments because we have them built out in VMs, and we can pretty quickly do an executive POC for your client where we just take a smaller subset of their data, we'll manipulate it real quickly into either a tabular model or into a cube or whatever the case, and then show them some dashboards and scorecards with their own data. So that's usually pretty powerful. So regardless of the approach, whether it's coming from the strategy side or the tactical side, we have accelerators to help us get going. So we've done this a lot of times. We have reference architectures, we have governance structures, things like that we've built out. And on the implementation side, we have generic code packages that we can use. So in the upper left-hand corner, what you're seeing is kind of a standardized ETL framework that has some auditing tables and things like that in it. So we can bring that in to jumpstart the integration process. We can bring in some standardized models that we've built in the past, or we can bring in the larger package, which is more of the buy scenario, which would be Health BI. Now, we're not really going to go into Health BI today, but you'll see one more slide on it here in a second. So whenever you start thinking about overall kind of the integrated healthcare offerings, they start to build up like this. So from the build strategy, if we don't need everything that Health BI has in it, and we need more customizable components, we would certainly start with some of the components that we've already built out, and we would just build onto those. We'd kind of snap them together, if you will, and then we would continue to customize them for your particular client. Now, this slide doesn't necessarily imply that Health BI is not customizable. It's just obviously when it's a custom build, that's the most customization you're going to get. And there's no real cost implication in this particular slide, so we just won't have the cost discussion right now. But sometimes people ask me if one is more expensive than the other, and we just have to wait until we actually hit the requirement. So if we were to talk about the Health BI initiative today, we would talk about some of these aspects of it, and we'd jump off to either Martin or Mike Jenkins. But we won't do that today. We're going to strictly stick with the build scenario, all right? So we're going to ask the question of, well, what can we build, under a custom scenario with these accelerators? So it's really, well, what does your client want? So it doesn't matter if it's, some financial analysis, bed utilization, surgical analytics, whatever the case is, as long as we can get to the data, we can build it because it all falls under the same BI methodology at the end of the day. Okay. Now, an important thing to realize, though, is what we will talk to your client about is how do we analyze and deliver this information so we have maximum adoption within the user group. So this is a pretty important concept to talk to your clients about. Do they want have a traditional BI approach, which will be more structured builds? A lot of times that's due to complexity. A lot of times it's deeper requirements, and it doesn't really matter if it's a waterfall or agile approach. It takes a little while longer because the construction happens within the IT department or the expanded department with our team there as well. Okay, so the IT department we know is very busy. They have a lot of things in queue. Our set of requirements comes in. It gets prioritized against the others, and maybe a couple months down the road, something gets produced. Now, a lot of our clients, what they're starting to ask for is more of the self-service approach. So this enables the business with ad hoc reporting and analysis capabilities. It shortens the cycle drastically because we no longer are stuck at the back end of that IT development queue. And IT actually kind of enjoys this aspect as well because it's taking some of the workload burden off of them. So we will actually see examples of both the traditional and self-service approach. Now, once we've made this decision, or once we've started this conversation with the client, typically the next question that will come up is, well, there's a lot of options within the Microsoft stack in terms of delivery, so how do we choose which one? So we've put together this visualization framework to help guide them through that process. So let's imagine what we've done is we've taken the entire user community that's your client, and we've divided them up into these 5 buckets. On the far left, the folks are the least technical. On the far right, they're the most technical. And the folks here in the middle, in this strategic operational monitoring section, they're a pretty important group for us to make sure that we implement the correct technology for, because they have the business acumen that they can perform their own analysis, basically kind of free-form exploration, and they won't necessarily analyze themselves into a corner. Right? So what we would do is then take the delivery stack and lay it over these different user groups, and these are kind of recommended starting points for where we would introduce a particular technology. So you see along the bottom, SharePoint and reporting services, those are certainly good standards. SharePoint will have to be there. But when it comes to, let's say, the traditional analytics side, so the good old-fashioned dashboards and scorecards that we saw earlier, we're most likely talking about and will recommend Performance Point. Now, we can build some things in reporting services that certainly act like dashboards and scorecards, but there's kind of a distinct advantage to using Performance Point that we can talk to your clients about if they have that question. And then once you go to the self-service side, we're obviously talking about PowerPivot and Powerview. So we will see examples of all that today. Now, then I'll step over to the demo. All right. So are we seeing a new screen here?
Yep, I'm good.
I just want to make sure it refreshed because I actually had to bring up the VM. Everyone seeing this? Okay. So what we're seeing here is our big bet virtual machine demo, and it's a standard SharePoint site. I'll give us a little bit more room here. And the way we've constructed this, so this was constructed by my team to be used jointly between Perficient and as well as Microsoft. We used a cleansed and de-identified healthcare data set from Microsoft, and we already had the SQL 2012 environments built out, so we combined the two and built these dashboards out. And what we did is we built them specifically on different technologies just so we could showcase some of the different things that we could do. And we actually listed it like that up here. So, and we have a demo script that you guys can use as well, so you can easily follow along and say, okay, this is what Performance Point would look like versus PowerPivot or whatever the case is. Okay. So what we're seeing here are kind of some standard metrics in terms of measuring wait time for patients. And we're seeing these numbers in terms of minutes across the hour. And we have kind of, standard, not drilling capability, but cascading filtering. So as I clicked on a particular number in this heat map, you saw the analytic charts below me update. And then, of course, if we want to start drilling into this 18-minute delay, we could, for a particular ward, we have the same capability that we've always seen, right, through Performance Point. So we could drill down all the way to the nurses that were on at that particular time. We can decide to pop this up and actually, change what we're looking at. We can real quickly add some additional measures to look at. So I'm assuming that a lot of the folks on the phone have seen these types of demos before, but maybe your client hasn't necessarily. Mm-hmm. So we have full drilling capability. I mean, it's a live site, so whether you're drilling down or drilling across or whatever the case, it's pretty easy to do here. So on these initial dashboards, what I'm going to do is just go through them fairly quickly. Oops, let me go back one more. So that was just kind of a main dashboard that we had. We also have something specifically around bed utilization, and here we're seeing the number of available and dirty beds, et cetera, for different campuses. So here, what we're really showing is, so the filtering and everything like that is still the same, which I didn't really dig into before, but it's pretty easy to see up there. But what we're showing on this particular dashboard is a combination of technologies, which we have Performance Point at the top, and it's linked with reporting services down below. So we're just showing an easy way to quickly update a reporting services report that maybe your client has already built that can be tied to a Performance Point dashboard. And the other thing we're showing here is where in the event that we have some real estate issues, and we want to stack a lot of information into one dashboard. So we're showing the ability to stack different types of scorecard components that are still tied to scorecards upstream, if you will. Right? So as I click on the different campuses, this scorecard component is updating as well as the bed utilization one that's underneath it. It's just hidden from view. And then finally on the Performance Point side, what we're looking at here is just an interesting way to look at length of stay. And obviously we have, you have the drilling capability to drill in per day, per campus, per a particular time, all the way down to, so now we can see comparisons across the different wards on length of stay based on time of day, et cetera. So we could continue with this basically ad infinitum, but I'm going to stop here and just ask if there's any general questions about the performance. Okay, so that was the traditional approach, right? So these types of dashboards would typically be built in the IT department or some other IT team, and then published up to SharePoint and then exposed to the users. So if we actually want the users to be able to pull data together themselves and perform their own analysis, what we would do is we would implement PowerPivot and Powerview if they have SQL 2012 for them. So what you're seeing here, I'm actually not going to go through the PowerPivot creation because it's kind of boring. It's just pulling data in on the back end. But once that happens, and that happens in Excel on the business user's desktop, they can publish it up to SharePoint, and then it becomes a usable model, if you will, for other reporting. Now, we know that we have some pretty good reporting and analysis capabilities in PowerPivot, but what I want to show here is what we've built in Powerview. So I should have actually clicked on that while I was talking, but it'll only take a second to come up. So what we have here, full screen mode. So here we're just looking at average charge and payment data across a couple of years for different patient classes, etc. So we have the years over here. We have the patient classes. And what we can see pretty quickly is we have somewhat of the same functionality that we had before, which is the cascading filtering just based on, clicking on certain areas. Okay? Now, within Powerview, the other nice thing that we have is we have the ability to look at changes as they happen over time. So what we're seeing here is, so here's outpatient, here's inpatient and average charge. And in a second, I'll look to see what the X and Y, well, I can see average charges on the X, average payments on the Y, and the size of the bubble looks to be patient count. So then obviously we can watch as these things change over time, which is a pretty nice new feature. Or we can just select a particular data set and watch, very distinctly how it changes. So now this is starting to get, a little bit more interesting on the analysis capabilities. But I think really one of the more interesting things, well, I'll go to that in a second here. I'm jumping ahead. So the business user had the capability. They built this particular dashboard that we're seeing, or this particular report. We also have the ability within Powerview to create what I would consider kind of a slideshow. So here we're seeing different data here that they wanted to drill in on specifically, and it was simply set up as like a second page, right, as opposed to what we just saw. So let's go back a second, and let's see how easy it is to actually create something like this. So I'm going to go to a different area in SharePoint as soon as we stop updating. I'm going to go to a different area in SharePoint, and whenever we put this model together, the business user put it together, push it up into SharePoint, it essentially can go up and can could stay as a PowerPivot document, or we could store it as a tabular model, but we don't have to get into that at this moment. This is what the user would go through, though, whenever they were actually getting ready to rebuild or to build a Powerview report from scratch. So we see just a blank canvas here. We see a pretty simple data set over here to the side, to the right, and this essentially would, works the same as like any pivot chart, does in Excel. So what you need to realize with Powerview is as we click in the canvas here, and as we start to select data, what happens is Powerview is going to make some assumptions for us based on the data set that we've selected. It's going to make some assumptions as to how we can visualize this data. So I'm going to go ahead and pick one. And we see that so it's given us our average charge and average payment over a month. And then as I click back down on the canvas here, I can go back and select some data again. And let's see, I want average charge and payment. I think I want maybe patient count. And let's pull up one. Let's see if I have this in the right order. Okay. So let's move a couple of these things around. Average charge, payment. I think I want patient count as the size. Okay, that's a little bit better. And I don't want month as the color. I want it as the play axis. Let's see what we have. Okay, so what you've seen here is that with really just a few clicks of the mouse, I've rebuilt a portion of the report that you just saw a few minutes ago. And we still have the interactive, so you can see here that we still have the interactive filtering capability. And that's because Powerview is running from the model and it understands the relationship. So I don't have to do anything to add in this cascading filtering capability. So even as I built additional components onto this report, if there's a relationship between the data, the components will know how to filter each other based on what I click on. Okay. So is there any questions on this?
No, I think it looks great.
So then we would name this as, healthcare analysis or whatever the case is. And when I talked about the storyboarding a minute ago, this is essentially what I would end up doing. So if I decided this was the first set of analysis that I wanted to provide, but I wanted to replicate that, it's as easy as just coming over here and saying, well, duplicate this view, and now maybe on this one, I want to add in some filters and, drop in patient class name and, whatever the case is, and I'll filter it just for emergency or whatever, right? And then, but I still have the initial analysis that I did before. So then I could save this report, I could export it out to PowerPoint, and instead of just exporting as a static slide in PowerPoint, this is actually a live slide. So any of this animation that we have here would still be available to run as an animation in PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, let's pop back. Let's see if we have any other questions. To kind of close up the deck, and I won't go through this really, but in the event that we're in front of your client and they have a mix of people in the room from both business as well as IT, we can dig into the lower level discussions for the IT department where we start talking about, our approach to dashboard design, or even if we want to go all the way back and start talking about, back-end considerations and architecture discussions and, even if we go all the way down to, ETL architecture or whatever the case. So we can have that discussion very readily with your client. I just don't think we probably want to have it here.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Okay.